Welcome to the Books Applied podcast, presented by WSL Leadership. In this podcast, we talk about an awesome book and how to apply it to your work, sport, or life. I'm your host, Iggy Perillo. Thanks for joining me. On today's episode, I am talking about the book The Third Side by William Ury. And you may recognize the name William Ury from that very famous and popular book called Getting to Yes. And that book is really all about negotiation and how to do that well in a way that's productive. But I'm going to be talking about his lesser known book, The Third Side. And I say lesser known because it's lesser known to perhaps you, but if you've at all worked with me in the near recent past, or even the probably slightly further past, you've heard me blabber on and on about this book. So I want to make sure I get it out there into everybody's ears and brains. It's been pretty influential in the work that I do, helping organizations shift how they manage conflict. So I'm going to dive right into it. Basically, this book is really about how we view conflict and the different roles within a conflict. If I say the roles in a conflict, you might think of the main two. There's like the winner and the loser role, and that's about it. But Ury would say there's also the third side. And the third side is the community or the greater space. And what happens there when people have conflicts in that space or that community. It could be people from the community. It could be the power of peers. It could be perspective and finding common ground. It might be this third side also supports a process of dialogue and nonviolence. It also aims to basically a win-win-win situation that wins for everyone involved and the community itself. And he describes it as the emergent will of the community. That's what the third side is. This book also has this kind of interesting, I don't know if I totally buy it, history of why we even have conflict at all. And I'm curious if folks give that part a read, if they come back and also listen to or read The Dawn of Everything and or Sapiens, which are also episodes on this podcast. Maybe some different ideas about why we have conflict at all in the world. Who cares? I find the result on what the third side is and how to be that third side to be super useful, super high impact in the work that I'm doing. So besides like the history of conflict, which I don't know if I'm totally dialed into, but whatever, it doesn't matter. He talks about different types of conflict. There are conflicts of interest, conflicts of position, and power struggles. There's this beautiful quote in there. If you see that you are causing problems, go away from the group for a while. Some handy advice. If you are the one causing problems, take a break. Give everyone a break from you. That sounds like a good idea, generally speaking. Have at it. But then he really gets into the real part of this book I love, which is sort of the second half, later chapters, and summed up in these three really beautiful little charts are the 10 roles of the third side. I'm glad I could count that many. So there are basically 10 different things you can do in a conflict to meet different outcomes. And the first are, there's 3 roles you could be in to prevent conflict from happening at all in the first place. Like, I should be thinking of how to prevent conflict. And so on this chart, and these get explained more in the book, which I definitely recommend the read, conflict escalates sometimes because there are frustrated needs. So the way to prevent conflict is this role called being the provider, which is some basic human needs, some love and respect, enabling people to meet their own needs. That's what the provider role does. If conflict is escalating because of poor skills, you need the teacher, which rolls in there in that conflict and supplies information, skills to handle conflict, and really can help delegitimize violence in those situations. If the conflict is escalating because of weak relationships, the role you need is the bridge builder, which is forging a relationship across lines of conflict and creating bonds that may seem unexpected at the time. And maybe these are bonds around shared goals, shared needs, shared other desires within that community. So if you want to prevent conflict from happening at all, here are your first 3 roles as the third side to sum up. We got the provider, the teacher, and the bridge builder. So totally different roles that you could take on during conflict. The next section are ways to resolve conflict. And there's 4 roles that could be doing this. If there are conflicting interests, you need the mediator role. If there are disputed rights, the arbiter role. Unequal power, it means you need the equalizer role. And injured relationships mean you need the healer role. And I think this is a section these roles, or these types of roles, are often what we think of when we're like, oh, there's a conflict, we need to resolve it. So skip all those people that would ever have prevented it and all those roles, dive right into the conflict resolution. We need to resolve it, we need to fix it. I think this book does a great job of defining these different roles. And it really made me realize when people say they want a mediator, which is someone to help reconcile interests and differences and find shared solutions, a lot of times what they actually really want is an arbiter or an arbitrator, is kind of how we often say that word. And we want someone to make a determination for us and make decisions on our behalf. So we think we want a mediator. We say, hey, we need a mediator. Can someone mediate this? But in reality, this part of our brain is like, I just want someone to decide that I'm right or they're wrong, or who gets what and who does what, and to simplify everything for us. So this is a really useful distinction to make between mediation and arbitration. There's also this other role, the equalizer, which actually comes in to democratize power and help bring the powerful people to the table. Because often conflict is happening in unequal power situations. Someone's like, I don't even want to talk about it. It's fine. And those are often the people that hold more power in the situation. So that third side role to equalize power means bringing people into the conversation and into basically dealing with the conflict at all. And the last role that I think we often disregard as a way to resolve conflict is the healer. And so this is repairing injured relationships, creating climate, listening and acknowledging things, encouraging apology if that's necessary. And the really goal of the healer is sort of reconciliation and repair of relationship. Not reconciliation to previous imbalances in relationship, but reconciling to the point that relationship is repaired so people can move forward. So those are the ways to resolve conflict. So let me read those back to you again. We have the mediator, the arbiter, the equalizer, and the healer. And that's what we think of when we're like, oh yeah, conflict, need to resolve it. That's who we need. Forget about preventing it. But there's three other interesting roles or ways to contain conflict. So conflict's already happening. We know it's going on out there, but maybe we just need to contain it. We couldn't prevent it. We're not resolving it. We need to contain it. And so the roles around containment are, if there's no attention, we need the witness. If there's no limitations, we need the referee. And if there's no protection, we need the peacekeeper, which is kind of our interesting ideas around containing conflict. So the idea that conflict needs to not spread to more people or to more organizations or beyond the community or into other communities or things like that. The witnesses pay attention to escalation. They watch out for early warning signals. They might speak out. They might get help fast. The referee sets limits to the fighting. There are ways to engage in constructive conflict, but you might need this referee to ensure the rules for fair fighting are happening, that people are making progress through this disagreement, through this conflict. And we also have the peacekeeper who provides protection, which might mean enforcing the peace, which is kind of weird, but also preempting violence before it starts. And these are folks that can go in and really create conditions for conflict to not spread is an ideal role. You might be thinking, like, when I read this first part about peacekeepers, I'm like, oh, like the UN troops that go in, but they're kind of like troops that show up, but they're called peacekeepers. Like, it seems a little counterintuitive. More is explained in the book. I'm just giving you the big high-level overview summary. The idea of all these 10 different roles is that when a conflict happens, you don't have to respond the same way. You don't have to respond the same way in every conflict, and nor does it make a lot of sense to always respond the exact same way no matter what conflict it is. Like, it just doesn't quite make sense. And so that's why the conflict escalating sort of criteria are part of these different roles. I mean, it is super helpful to look at if needs are frustrated, if there's skills missing, if there's weak relationships, if there are conflicting interests, disputed rights, unequal power, injured relationships, or a lack of attention, or a lack of limits, or a lack of protection in those conflicts. So those are, I think, much more interesting criteria to look at to decide, well, how do we respond to this situation? What do we want to have happen here? I think the other part of these 10 different roles is that the outcome is different. Am I preventing conflict? Am I resolving it, working to resolve it? Which personally, I'm like, am I working to manage it? I think resolution is a very high bar that we rarely ever accomplish. And I have many ideas for why that is the case. Or are we just trying to contain conflict so we can all get on with our lives and go about our day or go about doing our things that we always have done? And that is your super quick, super fast summary of the third side. I've used these ideas in a lot of the organizations I work with when they say, we need a mediator. We need someone to mediate. Again, like in my brain, I'm like, do you actually want or need a mediator? Or are you asking for a mediator, but you actually want an arbiter to decide for you? I've had people also ask me, hey, can you just come in and decide for us? They essentially are asking for an arbiter or an outside source to decide on something. I think the far more useful role in all of these that actually leads to bigger change over time is that role of the healer, which we don't always see as a viable role within a conflict. We see the healer as like, oh yeah, well, when it's done, we'll patch everyone up again. When it's over, we'll put everyone back together again, versus looking at the damage to relationships as a core piece of why this conflict is happening in the first place, and working to repair and restore trust and respect in relationships so that people can engage maybe in productive conflict, maybe in managing conflict, maybe in resolving conflict, in any of those things. So that's my 2 cents on how this is super useful, a super productive book. And thanks for listening to this very quick episode today. Again, we were talking about The Third Side by William Ury. I highly recommend the read. It's pretty fast. Maybe skip the first half or don't, whatever. Live your life and get into those 10 roles for the third siders. Very fascinating stuff, and will hopefully give you more ideas of how you can respond the next time you see a conflict. Looking at the causes, looking at what's like fueling that conflict, and working to resolve those conflicts, even if you're not one of the parties involved. And you could probably use these same roles and be thoughtful about these roles if you are a party involved in a conflict, recognizing those escalating factors and how you, as a member of the conflict, as part engaging in that, can help move things forward in a way that's productive and meaningful. That's what I got for you all today. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Books Applied podcast. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a new book and learning how to apply its ideas to make your work, sport, or life a little bit more awesome. For more leadership education-related content, including conflict management checklists, invitations to a fun free lunch that happens monthly, upcoming classes, webinars, and mastermind groups, please head over to wslleadership.com. Thanks, and have a great day.